Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on scaling climate investment into fragile and conflict-affected states. My name is Layali Abdeen, and I am the MENA Regional Head for the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA. What is MIGA? MIGA is part of the World Bank Group, and its mission is primarily to promote foreign direct investments into emerging economies, and we do that primarily by offering political risk insurance and credit enhancement products. An IMF study shows actually that fragile and conflict-affected states suffer from climate change, and they suffer from climate change due to their climate vulnerabilities and the underlying fragilities. And such vulnerabilities and fragilities are compounded there due to FCS geographical location and their dependence on agricultural sector. This is alarming. This is alarming because FCS actually is a home for over 1 billion of people and 43% of the world's poor. Furthermore, FCS countries lack resources and continue to face barriers to scaling climate finance. And in today's session, we will look at some of these actually challenges and hear from our panelists how they are trying to scale such climate finance and take forward the climate agenda. With us today and on stage, we have Dr. Jassim Al-Hamadi, Deputy Minister of Environment of Iraq. We have also with us Mr. Atano Das, Vice President and Head of Project Finance at Aqua Power. And we have also, of course, with us Ms. Mesky Braun, MENA Regional Director for Sustainable Development Department at the World Bank. Welcome all. And maybe I will start my first question to you, Dr. Jassim. Could you please share with us how Iraq is dealing with climate threats? And if you can also share with us how you are also, or what are the challenges that you are facing in attracting private investment into the climate action?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for you, and thanks for all the audience, distinguished guests. As all of us know that, and with the United Nations reports that my country classified as one of the most fragile and vulnerable countries towards the climate change. One of the most important issues that we are faced as a part of a climate impact on my country was the drought, desertification, and successive reduction in our water resources. And this lead to an increase the incidence of land degradation, limitation in the land ready for agriculture, in addition to increase the incidence of the dust storm. More than 90% of our water resources coming transboundary. And you know there is a new policy for our neighbors, Turkish side and Iranian side, that to build a huge number of dams, about 22 dams in Turkish side. What has been finalizing was 3. And in the Iranian side, there is obstruction to 42 rivers and tributaries and changing even the direction of the river. This will make the situation, but in addition to the impact of climate change, successive increase in the temperature, it might reach in hot summer to more than 50 centigrade, 50 Celsius, and increase the evaporation of about 5 billion cubic meter because of exposed rivers that passing through thousands and thousands of kilometers from their entrance to their exit in the southern area of Iraq. Really the most fragile part of my country, according to towards the climate change, was Basra, Misan, Dhiqar, Al-Muthanna. These 3 provinces are the most affected. So that really we are facing a huge impact of climate change regarding we didn't find that the minimum level of water security and our water reservoir in our dam now, it is the worst since 7 decades because there is a deterioration in the rainfall because of the climate change, increase in the temperature, and increase the demand of the population. And on other side, there is an increase in the fertility. We reach about 275%, about 1,003,100 a year. We increase in the population. From other side, we have a huge pressure of our limited natural resources, and from other hand, there is an increase in the population. This will make the situation really very bad, and there is one of the amazing area in the southern area of Iraq, which is classified as or nominated as one of the World Heritage Area, which is the southern marshland or Al-Ahwar in the southern area of Iraq, which has been now deteriorated because there is no sufficient water resources. The people there are really depend on fishing, depend on agriculture, and they are obligated more than 70,000 people, 70,000 family obligated to leave their land. And this, as a result of the impact of climate change, the climate refugees or the environmental refugees and internally displaced people, and, an increase in the conflict and the crisis because many people might have some troubles in between the people and the provenance, in between the tribe, and even all these conflict and the crisis, it might be a transboundary. So that the impact of climate change was huge. And as I always say that we consider now as a government the climate change as a serious challenge, and it is the priority, especially in our governmental program. And for the first time in the governmental program, we have environment, climate change, and renewable energy in the governmental programs for this new government, His Excellency the Prime Minister. And for the first time that the national budget contains more than $7 billion to support the sector of environment, climate change, and renewable energy. Of course, it's distributed to many ministries on sectors, on oil and gas sector, energy sector, agriculture, water resources, and something like that. The most vulnerable sector in my country was the water resources and agriculture because of all these causes that I already mentioned. About 33% of our population living in the rural area, they depend mainly on agriculture. If there is no sufficient water, of course, their land has been degraded. And now we do our best in order to fix those people in their land and to prevent the worst consequences of climate change. And the report of the World Bank, which is called the Climate and the Development Report, and I personally share a writing of this report. In addition to our supreme policy, our national strategy towards the climate change, which is the National Determined Contribution, we have a voluntary governmental commitment according to the huge impact as a message towards the international community to save and to protect our planet that we have on our side on national level to reduce our emission by 1 to 2%, and now we exceed. Now we exceed this percent, of course, because we have a very important projects, especially in the field of oil and gas, utilizing the associated gas, preventing the emission of methane emission, which is important for us. And now really we have a time roof for this at about 2030. I think we can achieve a total prevention of methane emission from the oil and gas sectors, in addition to integrating the NDC in all our national strategy and plan. In addition to that, we are focusing upon the technology transfer, especially in the field of agriculture and water resources. So I think there is a very important change in the mentality that deal with the impact of climate change in my country, of course, with the support of the United Nations organization, with the support of international community, with the presence and support of World Bank. There is many projects that we are working together, but really we are in need to much more support, especially in the field of capacity building and technical support. Sometimes the finance or the support, not only as a finance, but also we are concentrating and focusing upon the technology transfer because we are in need to deal with the new technology, especially in agriculture. Our people still till now, they are using the old-fashioned irrigation system, and with a huge depletion of very limited water resources. We consider the water security, food security as a part of our national security. And I think all of you notice or read the report that has been announced by the intelligence services in the US, that reports it make a huge association between the national security and the climate change, or climate change and security. My country mentioned 3 times in this report, especially in the field of health, in the field of economy, and in the field of political stability. So there is a direct correlation between the impact of climate change and our national security. And just I want to add one important thing, that my country passing through a 4 decade of war and political and security and stability. And the most important era or period was we are facing the terrorist group of ISIS in spite or instead of all the world. And really we are, a lot of our young people self-sacrificing in order to make all the people live in peace. And that huge destruction, our infrastructures need much more financial resources. So we deplete a lot of financial resources. In the field of climate change, we have a voluntary commitment, governmental commitments. In the field of mitigation, we exceed what has been a commitment for my government. Now we have a special focusing on adaptations. We need to support us in the field of adaptation in order to rehabilitate, reconstruct our massive destructive infrastructures in all fields in order to be with the national and international criteria.
Thank you, Dr. Jassim, for this really excellent overview, I would say, that have summarized the challenges that Iraq faces. And indeed, I mean, what we call the forced migration because of the climate threats, it is a major issue that FCS countries face and compounds their fragility as such. And also maybe we need also at some point to talk about how this also affects the economy and how it drags that down. But thank you actually for outlining that. Maybe Atano, to bring you into the discussion, I know Aqua Power has been leading on investing in climate resilient projects, in renewable energy projects as well. And Aqua Power has been quite very active in emerging economies. And I know that you have been also eyeing some FCS actually economies as well. It would be really interesting for us to hear the private sector perspective on the opportunities and the challenges of investment into FCS.
No, thank you, Leali. I think, first of all, a privilege to be here and sort of be part of this panel. A quick word on Aqua Power. I know Leali made that introduction, but we are, as you know, in 3 businesses, which is power generation, water desalination, and a natural extension to that, which is green hydrogen, which is essentially using renewable energy and desalinated water to produce hydrogen in a clean and efficient way. Look, it's been 11 years for me in Aqua Power, and when I made the transition from the dark side to the light side, when I joined Aqua Power, the thought process was that the operative phrase that we had was that we are technology agnostic and fuel agnostic, and I can now assure you that those things have been ditched from our perspective. We made that call very early in the piece that we are going to be doing projects in a very sustainable way in whichever markets that you operate in. We took a call very early in the piece, near the Paris Agreement, when the Paris Agreement was being signed, that we will be we will take a very clear pathway wherein we will step away from liquids, we'll step away from coal. And today we have completely stepped away from coal. We have written off millions of dollars and converted coal assets into gas, at least as part of the energy transition. And likewise, we have decided to sort of completely unwind over a period of next 3 to 4 years our exposure to liquids and using liquids to generate power. Now, to come to your point, question, Layali, I think we have been an emerging market player. We are not in the developed economies. We started out in the GCC. We are a Saudi company, and more than 50% of our business still remains the kingdom. But we now operate in over 13 countries across the world, and which are largely in the emerging market space. And from day one, we have all our investments that we have made in these countries have been done on the framework that these are sustainable investments, and we are very closely interlinked with the communities that we sort of put in place those investments. Just to give an anecdotal evidence or a case in point, our investments in South Africa that we have done in the renewable energy space, we have structured them in a way that the community itself plays a part of those investments. They get a equity carry in those projects, and the dividend flows that goes from the projects goes directly into the community. And in our case, in at least one of the projects, we've actually spent those monies not directly, it is not directly spent by the community, but jointly spent by the community and us in developing social infrastructure and educational infrastructure at the grassroots level, just to give a perspective. Now, in terms of the challenges that you face, look, I'm a project finance person, and ACWA is a serial user of project finance. Right. So one thing to note is that for every dollar that you put in any project, the multiplier effect on the economy is not $1, right? It's almost like $8 or $9 given the leverage that you put in place. And the leverage that you put in place comes from financial institutions. And in emerging economies, the biggest supporters for us from the financial institution space has been the MDBs, has been the DFIs, and has been the export credit agencies. Commercial banks has really stayed away from those markets. And it's one of my pet peeves that we have not been able to attract more commercial banks to come into emerging economies and sort of co-partner with us and become key stakeholders on those projects. So the big challenge that I face, and I think I'll come to that probably later in the next phase, is probably how do we mobilize DFI capital for the scale of investments that we need in these emerging economies. I'll again give an example. In two of the countries that you're operating in Central Asia, one is Uzbekistan and the other is Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, we are just about getting into Kazakhstan, but in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan over 2024, I will need to raise around $3 billion of capital, $3 billion of long-term project financing across renewable energy projects, both in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and encompassing various technologies, including solar, including wind, and battery storage facilities. So that's absolutely imperative that we are able to raise that capital. My biggest challenge that I have is that when I go out to the MDBs, and when I speak to each of the MDBs and the DFIs, one of the things that comes back to us is that, you know what, we also have exposure limits. We are working, you are a lead developer, we work with you a lot, but at some point of time, you know what, we are going to, eat up our limits and, reach the thresholds that you have. And even though I'm fairly confident that our pipeline over 2024, we can easily finance with the guidance of help of MIGA and the World Bank and the other MDBs, I'm a bit skeptical that going forward, as the economic requirements of these emerging markets that you get into grow, whether we will be able to mobilize the kind of capital that we need entirely from the DFI space. So that's something which is very clear. It's I'm struggling with it, and it sort of will keep me awake, if not today, at least here. And this time next year will certainly keep me awake. We are also looking, I know Dr. Jassim is here, we are also very seriously looking at Iraq as a key investment destination for us. And by the time I think we really got to the chase and go to raise financing, I suspect we might need to broaden the pool of financing that is available significantly. So that's a big challenge for us. And I think the way out for this is only one. The way out for this is that we need the support of MDBs to be able to structure products which enables capital rotation. We need MDBs to be able to take the greenfield risks in this project. That's where the real development work happens, right? Where you're actually putting in the place and you're supporting a greenfield development of a critical infrastructure in a country. Where the MDBs, and I'm being a bit provocative here, Laeli is here with me, is where the lack, and there have been a bit of a lacking from their side, is the level of product development which will enable us to actually refinance the MDBs when the project is significantly de-risked. Not today, but when the project is operational, when project is throwing up cash, that's when you need to bring in capital flows from alternative sources to actually refinance the MDBs so that the MDBs can do what they do best, which is financing greenfield development, taking greenfield risk in all emerging markets. That's where I think we have to work very closely with the MDBs, and we have set the ball rolling. We're talking to each of the MDBs and trying to see if there are products which will enable us to at least try and refinance this in a way that brings commercial capital and private capital in those economies. And I think there was a speaker in the previous panel from an asset manager, and he mentioned, I forget the quantum of liquidity they mentioned, which is available in the bond markets, right? That's where I think the true home of project finance resides, the permanent capital which will take it out. So these are emerging economies and fragile economies, sub-investment grade economies, right? You cannot just go out and issue a credit-rated bond, which is like if you get a high yield, and in the high yield space, there's not that much of liquidity, and the pricing will be absolutely obnoxious. So we need the MDBs to be able to structure products which gives us credit enhancement so that you can at least try and crowd in private sector in those markets. So that's the challenge for us. I think the jury is still out whether we'll be able to succeed on that, but I hope 1 year down the road, 2 years down the road, we'll be having the same conversation and we've done at least one transaction, and you've set a framework for this to grow.
No.
It has to happen.
Thank you. No, thank you, Atano, for that. And maybe just to pick on that a little bit. Go ahead. You wanted to complete something?
No,
yeah.
go ahead.
I just want to pick on that in relation to unlocking the private financing, actually. Because as you said, indeed, the MDB envelope and the DFI's financing and the concessional financing is quite very limited. It will not be able to address the needs of the emerging economies as well as FCS economies. But I think where the story lies is behind the guarantees. Because per MEGAs and per our data, it seems that every dollar MEGA guarantees, it is able to mobilize around $16 in financing. This is major, and this is the only way that we would be able actually to unlock the private capital that is sitting in the financial capital markets. And in relation to the idea that you stated of recycling the MDB capital, I absolutely a believer of that, and we should do that. And we have done that actually in Egypt. Within the Binban Solar Park, as we were trying to refinance 6 operating assets through issuing a project bond that actually enabled the recycling of a portion, let me put that way, of the DFI capital. So indeed, but much more work is needed on that front. But thank you actually for highlighting that, Atano.
I just have one point to add to that, is that there's one more stakeholder, right, which we need to work very closely with. When you mentioned the Egyptian bond, it sort of jogged my memory a bit, and that's the rating agencies. Unfortunately, if you look at the top rating agencies, the tier 1 agencies, they still work on the principle of extreme conservatism, right, in terms of how they credit rate a project or a limited recourse project bond. We need to work very closely with the rating agencies and try to see if there is a mechanics which will enable them to look at it in a slightly different way, look at emerging economies in a slightly different way, and try to look at credit enhancement provided by institutions like MEGA or even the EBRDs or the IFCs of the world in a slightly different way, right? And not just look at whether something happens tomorrow, will the bondholders get their money back 3 days later? That does not happen in these economies, especially given the contractual framework. We need to be able to find something, whether that gap which is there between where the actual event of loss happens and actual capital goes back to the bondholders, that how can we shorten the time frame? That is the critical point for us. And I think that's where I think we still need a lot of work to be done.
And I agree, and I think this is an ongoing discussion that is happening also between the regulators and the DFIs on that front. Thank you, Atano, for your very interesting views. Meske, I want to turn to you, and from an MDB perspective, And I know that the World Bank, as a World Bank group, we have the FCV strategy where we are trying to help FCS countries, building their capacities, their institutions, and we have also powerful diagnostic tools like the CCDRs that Dr. Jassim mentioned. So we would be really interested to hear from you how MDBs such as the World Bank play a role in unlocking or in providing the enabling environment for climate finance. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Layali. And it's really great to be here and especially have the opportunity to interact with Dr. Gassim because we've been working very closely, as you mentioned, on the CCDR, and also to hear the perspective of the private sector because I think we're often trying to see how do we unlock the private sector. And it's interesting to see that the private sector is also asking the same question. So it's great that we're all on the same table. I think this COP is actually the very first COP to specifically mention and have a strong focus on FCS, right? And as it should be, because climate change is having a very, very strong impact and puts at special risk countries that are fragile and conflict affected. So if you look at the 25 countries in the world that are the most climate risk, affected by climate risk, about 17 of them are actually on our list of countries affected, FCS countries, right? So the focus is really the right one. And we have our FCV strategy. We're very, very committed as an institution to financing and supporting recovery and service delivery, et cetera. But we know also that FCS countries face a very, very significant constraint in terms of access to finance, in terms of the capacity to deliver services, et cetera. So we come in from two perspectives. One is, of course, the direct financing, but the second, as you mentioned, is really to look at data and analytics because especially in the climate space, it's so important that we understand what the dynamics are. But in FCS countries, the systems for doing that type of research and analytics is not there, and so you're not able to come up with development appropriate responses. So that's why we do the CCDRs, and we're having in the MENA region a very specific focus on FCS countries. So we did the one from Iraq last year, and it was actually disseminated at COP27. For this COP, we have done the West Bank and Gaza one, so I encourage everybody to take a look. I think it's a fabulous piece of work that's really going to help set the baseline for how we continue to support Palestine. And we are in the process of doing CCDR for Yemen now, just starting it, and we are finalizing the one for Lebanon. So a rich body of work. So based on the ones that we have already done, I could mention maybe three sort of key takeaways and messages that we have found. So the first is really the challenge of governance and service delivery. So like the limited public funds that are available are not going towards development efforts. So routine kind of operations and maintenance investments are not being made. So a really important and devastating sort of illustration of this is what happened in Darna in Libya, right? In just September, there was a horrible flood, and there were two reasons for that. One is you had bouts of drought and floods that led to the filling of a dam, but the lack of investments in the dam infrastructure led to a breach. So if it were in a normal sort of situation, the maintenance had been done, et cetera, this devastation would have never happened, right? So that's one very special case. The other is, as Dr. Qasim mentioned, not just in Iraq, but what a pattern we're observing all over MENA is the issue of water scarcity. It's a huge, huge issue. And in MENA specifically, actually a lot of conflict is related around the scarcity of water. Dr. Qasim mentioned the challenge in Nineveh and other bread baskets of Iraq that are now being drained of their water resources, and so then that causes displacement and so forth. But then related to water scarcity is also the issue of transboundary waters, because all of our countries in MENA actually, let's say in the Mashrek, they're all shared water resources, right? So if you don't have a government that is strong and able to negotiate, then you're not able to have the mechanisms by which to dialogue and debate and sort of receive your fair share of the water resources. So that's another issue. And the final issue is, when you have such large-scale displacement of populations, you start to lose, the social resilience, the social fabric and resilience systems, and even the livelihood mechanisms, right? So those are also risk factors. So those are the three issues. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, Miski, for that, and for actually outlining also the common themes for FCS in this region. Actually, I want to shift into not another topic, but shift into a topic that is, I would say, might be not discussed very prominently, which is climate adaptation. I know that usually governments, private sector primarily focus on climate mitigation and bringing financing into climate mitigation. But we don't see a lot of private financing or actually government financing into climate adaptation. So, Dr. Jassim, I want to hear your view about what Iraq is doing in relation to climate adaptation. And maybe, Atano, the private sector also view on investing in climate adaptation projects versus climate mitigation.
Thank you very much. Really, all of us here because of one thing. We want to save and to protect the planet, and also we are all seeking for what's called the climate justice. We think that there is double dealing with this issue. My country classified as one of the most vulnerable countries toward the climate change, and also it's one of the famous oil-producing country. And we are the third reservoir of oil all over the world. And as you know, and as I mentioned, we are passing through a very difficult situation that and sometimes affecting the existence of my country. And my country, derived its name and its civilization, which is related to much more than 7,000 years from the presence of Euphrates and Tigris. And the drought, we consider it as a matter of existence. And then what we are facing now is an adaptation issue, because all our emission in my country is less than 0.6, and it's a negligible ratio, but we put in our consideration we are a part of this planet, and our supreme strategy towards the climate change, we have commitment on governmental side and also private sectors to reduce our emission by 1 to 2% on national level and 13 to 15 level with the support of international community. And the main of our emission in the field of oil and gas. And now my government has a serious program to utilize this associated gas, which is used to be burned by what's called the flare. And now more than 60% of those ratio it has been utilized. And we have 2030 as the maximum limit for us to complete or zero emission in the field regarding the flare. So our concentration now in my government, in my country, was related to adaptation. How to make a national adaptation plan, which is ready. We're finalizing the NAB, National Adaptation Plan, and NAMA, roadmap, and of course, with the coordination and the support of the UNDP, United Nations program, development program. But I think there is no much more attention regarding supporting the developing and underdeveloped countries in the field of adaptation. they always nagging for us, as we are the cause for the climate change. You know, the richest country, because of 300 years of their industrial activities that make them rich, we are victims of the climate change now. We are suffering from drought. We are suffering from the deterioration in our water resources and the deterioration in our rainfall, drought, desertification, dust storm. 106 days, the last year, there is the incidence of dust storm. And all of it is transboundary. And you know, it affects our economy, our health, our security, and even many sectors, transportation and so. So that I think on our governmental commitments regarding the adaptation plan, now there is a huge opportunity for the private sector to be engaged as a part of implementing the NDC in my country. Now we have many projects for establishing the solar station to produce energy from the solar. And we have more than 5 contracts that has been already signed. Now, in the field of electricity, there is a very important work to change the simple cycle station towards the combined cycle using the gas. We have the sweet gas to produce energy, and also the utilizing the associated gas. And the first company, private sector, in undercover or support from the government with cooperation with German side, now one of the biggest factory to produce the solar plate in my country. It will be about to finalize, about to open in the in the January of 2024. I think we have a huge work in the field of renewable energy now, and we are convinced we should have a gradual transition toward the renewable energy, and also we have a strategy for a gradual transition towards the green sustainable economy by encouragement, by the government support, the productive sector, smart agriculture, and a clean industry, and supporting the tourism, especially the environmental tourism. And you know, my country, all Iraq, it's considered as a big museum because of its ancient civilization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jassim. Atano, to you. And
look,
you have probably 2 minutes.
quickly. So look, quick segue. I think Dr. Jassim specifically mentioned water, and I'll sort of touch on water and what we have been doing from a climate adaptation perspective on the water side. We are the world's largest desalinator in the private sector. The only other entity which is bigger than us is the government of Saudi Arabia, right? We are the world's largest desalinator in the private sector, and I think over the period of time, we have always adapted our expertise in desalination in the different geographies that we have operated in, right? When we started out, desalination was entirely through thermal desalination. It's very emission intensive, right? But what we have done today is 2 things. Most of the desalination plant, or all of the desalination plants that we are now putting in place, are using advanced reverse osmosis plants, number 1. And the second element, of course, is if you look at 80% of the capital costs or the production costs for a cubic meter of desalinated water, it is essentially electricity, it's the energy costs. So what we have done is, as renewable energy costs have shown a secular decline over the last 7 to 8 years, we have started embedding renewable energy assets in our water desalination plants. In fact, we pioneered it, and the first one that we did is actually in Abu Dhabi, a couple of 100 odd kilometers down the road from here, where you put more than 100 megawatts of solar PV panels, modules in the site to desalinate 180 MIGD of water. Now, this is now almost the standard operating procedures in most of the countries that you're operating in and most of the jurisdictions where you're putting in place desalinated water. Now, from our perspective, I think desalination, water is a very emotional subject and is going to be absolutely critical going forward in most of the emerging economies that we operate in, right? And I think the way out, as Dr. Jassim mentions, as aquifers dry up, the water table drops, maybe the solution there is desalination using climate-friendly reverse osmosis plants and embedding renewable energy so that you can keep the energy costs low. the specific power consumption, which is the key unit for desalination, which is essentially the units of electricity that you use per meter cube of water that you desalinate, from 2014, which is something like 15 kilowatt hours per meter cube per day. Today has come down by more than 80% to around 3 kilowatt hours per meter cube of water desalinated. So that's the kind of efficiencies that you have brought into the system. And I think going forward, we see as ACWA Power as a big player in the renewable space and in the water desalination space, a lot more emphasis on the water side in desalination plants. Before I conclude, just one sort of anecdotal evidence. We were approached by someone in Mongolia, which is a landlocked country, to try to see if we can put in place desalination plants there. It's a landlocked country, but they have lakes with brackish water in that, where the desalination technology can be used to provide potable water on a sustainable basis. So that's the kind of things that we are looking forward to, and we are fully geared up for that.
Thank you, Atanu, very much. Meski, do you want to add anything about adaptation? And you have 1 minute.
Okay, right. Yeah, so on adaptation, maybe 2 points. One is at the international level, I think it's really important that we start to give a special, maybe a special window or special access rights to FCS countries for adaptation. And the second is to come up with maybe innovative financing instruments like debt swaps that address, climate-related issues, de-risking instruments so that, private sector can also provide support. So that's from sort of like international finance perspective. But I think the countries also have a big responsibility, right, around developing capacity, around many of these issues, developing early warning systems. Like I mentioned in Darna, if there were an early warning system, many lives would have been spared. And then, of course, continuing to work with humanitarian organizations and also local actors as sort of in this ecosystem where you have to bring multiple partners to work together to help communities be more resilient.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Meski, and thank you, panelists, for your contributions, for your rich insights. And I think what we have done in this session, actually, we tried just to summarize exactly the threats that FCS countries face. We have talked about financing tools and the financing challenges in investing in climate mitigation and adaptation, actually, projects. And we also learned about the World Bank, diagnostic tools like the CCDRs and their importance, actually, for both the private sector and the government sector. Thank you very much, and I wish you a great evening. Thanks.
Thank you.